The razor clam, an animal familiar to most of us from our earliest walks along the tide line. Their washed-up shells are common sight on beaches all around our coasts. But whilst for most of us it currently represents little more than a natural curiosity in the sand, further afield it represents a lucrative and growing market. In continental Europe, in Spain and Portugal in particular, harvesting these molluscs has been a thriving industry for many years. They are exported around the world and are very popular in many Asian countries where they are eaten as a delicacy. Closer to home, many restaurants in the United Kingdom and Southern Ireland are also waking up to the potential of the razor clam, and it's likely that eventually the market here could be as lucrative as it is abroad.
The flavour from razorfish is like nothing else that I could take. There is absolutely nothing that I can compare it to. It is the sweetest, most natural shellfishy flavour. Its texture is often described like asparagus, biting into asparagus, and my goodness, what a flavour.
But razor clams are by no means a recently discovered gastronomic delight. There are records of them being served at banquets across Europe from as early as the 14th century. Previously, the species has not really been exploited in our waters apart from minimal harvesting in the southwest of England and Scotland, and in Southern Ireland, where a small fishery has been operating for some years. But the fishing industry is becoming increasingly interested in the razor clam. The beds are accessible. The techniques are similar to those used in other developed fisheries, and the depletion of some continental fisheries due to overexploitation means that there is a demand to be satisfied.
We buy razor shellfish because we can see a very good opportunity in this business to produce and to export into an expanding market, is what we seem to have found with it, especially throughout Spain. Business seems to be booming in the razor clam industry there. And we'd like to try and exploit that market and to create what we would see as a good quality product to export.
Western Isles Fishermen's Association looks after the interests of all fishermen in the Western Isles, and in particular we're looking at developing new fisheries and to make sure that they're developed in a long-term sustainable manner. Yes, we're looking at in the Western Isles and the way forward in two specific shellfish fisheries. These are razorfish and cockles, two fisheries that are currently closed and they can only be opened under a regulating order. We're seeing that there is good potential for good economic returns, employment creation, and I would say the value of £500,000 to the Western Isles economy between the two fisheries.
However, the fact remains that until recently we knew very little about the razor clam, despite it being such a common and familiar animal. Extensive research has revealed some of its secrets, but much still remains to be learned. There are many questions to be answered before we can be sure we're able to maintain an efficient and profitable fishery. A fishery producing consistently high quality, which is sustainable in the long term.
One of the problems with any fishery is understanding the biology, and it's more than true for razor clams is we just don't know enough about the biology, whether they're annual spawners, what age they mature at, how quickly they grow, what sort of production population of razor clams has. And one of the key aims of this project is to investigate more about the biology.
In this programme, we'll be reviewing our knowledge of the razor clam and looking at current harvesting techniques. We'll also examine the best way of handling the animals to maintain their quality and maximise returns. In this way, it's hoped to promote interest in the species and to encourage further research to be done. 3 species of razor clam are commonly found in our waters, and they are identified by size and shape. The smallest species, Ensis ensis, has a pronounced curve to its shell, whilst the 2 larger species can be separated by their different body shapes when viewed head-on. Ensis arcuatus looking much more oval than Ensis siliqua. Future research may well reveal differences in biology which could dictate different handling techniques or shelf life. We also need to identify any animals we wish to place on the market by species, so it's important to be able to identify the 3 species. A 4th species may in time colonize our waters. Ensis directus is a native of America, which is now found along North Sea coasts from Denmark to northern France and is already resident in the Wash. Razor clams are found in intertidal and subtidal habitats to a depth of about 40 meters, where they burrow into the sand using their muscular foot. The vertical burrows are deep, sometimes up to a meter long, and the animals feed at the top of these by protruding their short siphon. Until recently, it was believed they were sedentary, but remarkably, it has now been discovered that they can propel themselves along the seabed quite quickly, often travelling several meters before burrowing back into the sand.
We know that the animals do move around the sediment. Film that people have collected from around the country shows razor clams moving across the surface of the sand using siphons and foot movements. Whether that's a routine activity or whether that's more of an emergency escape response, I think has yet to be proved. I think there's quite considerable evidence that the animals can sense the presence of a dredge and move away. Work that we've done with divers diving alongside the dredge, they have seen animals from about 2 meters either side of the dredge climbing out of the sand and moving away. So clearly the animals are able to sense the presence of a dredge and move away from that disturbance.
There are several methods of harvesting razor clams currently in use. Perhaps the simplest method is to dig them out on a beach, but using salt is a more popular alternative. Once the burrows have been located, salt is put in and around the burrow entrance, making the clams leave the safety of the sand. They can then be collected with ease. Although relatively small scale, this type of harvesting can produce a valuable additional income for the fishermen at times when the weather makes it impossible to put to sea.
Name's Keith Campbell. I'm a fisherman. I've been fishing for 15 years. My main catch is lobsters, crabs and razor clams. When weather's poor and you can't get out to your creels, you can always come to razor clams if the tide and wind suits.
I've been fishing for the best part of 20 years and sold my skipper's ticket 10 years ago, and since then I was skippering a couple of vessels twin rigging for prawns, and I bought this vessel here about March 97, and we were fishing twin rigging for prawns. And then with the cod closure, the cod recovery plan in the Irish Sea, for this type of vessel, she was better suited for. She wouldn't be suited for the further deeper waters. So we made a decision to go razor clam fishing last November.
Razor clams can also be harvested underwater by divers who use much the same techniques as on shore. Telltale keyhole depressions on the seabed or siphons projecting from the sand give away the animal's location. Then it's simply a case of grasping the clam quickly between thumb and forefinger and pulling it from its burrow. A twisting action makes sure that the foot isn't left behind. Salt can also be used as an alternative. The increased salinity quickly makes the clams vacate their burrows and they can then be collected from the seabed. Although undeniably a labour-intensive method of harvesting, diving can produce surprisingly high catches and has the added advantage that the quality is higher than that achieved by dredging. Animals harvested by hand rarely contain grit and are subject to far less trauma and stress than mechanically harvested animals, so are much more likely to reach the marketplace in good condition.
When I capture razorfish, it's usually I'll go down on the seabed, identify a siphon and then catch by hand. It's only razor shellfish that I'll actually go for. There's nothing else I'm after at the time, so I can be very selective when I see the siphons. We handle them by taking them to the surface in a bag, maybe 20-25 kilos in a bag. They'll be passed to the boatman who will then put them into a tray He'll band them into 1 kilo bundles, and then they're placed into another tray which is covered, and water will be poured onto them every so often just to keep a level on them, keep them cool and keep them out of the sun.
Another way to harvest razor clams is by dredging. There are 3 main types of dredge, but it's now generally accepted that the standard blade dredge is not an efficient design.
Due to the high levels of breakages, the blade dredge has come into much criticism over the years, and there would be a case indeed for restricting its use, given that the other types of dredges have produced far less breakage levels than the blade dredge.
Less harmful to the catch and the seabed are fluidized dredges. All fluidized dredges operate by injecting pressurized water into the seabed. As the dredge is pulled along, animals are washed or pumped out by the water jets rather than simply raked from their burrows.
The big problem was, like, under certain sand conditions the foot dredge worked very well, but as soon as the sand became tough or we couldn't control the speed of the boat over the ground, the foot dredge actually caused quite high damage rates. And we've been noticing since we've went back to the job that we've been looking at other developments, both in Italy and in Ireland, that the dredge that comes from the top, the spray dredge, if we're going to talk it that way, or the top jet dredge, it has a lot less mortality.
The jet dredge uses a tilted working position combined with jets of water, which results in an altogether more gentle process than using a blade dredge. The benefit is a considerably reduced level of waste, with a damage and mortality rate of less than 5%. A further refinement to this principle is the so-called Italian dredge, which was developed by fishermen in the Adriatic. Using a much smaller slotted blade and additional water jets, the even gentler action of this design increases efficiency further still. The number of damaged or dead clams is reduced to less than 3% of the total.
Of all the types of dredge I've seen, I think I was most impressed by the Italian hydraulic dredges. The design of washing in the dredge, washing the catch as it's sat in the dredge, I think is most useful. You can fish for longer and you end up with a cleaner catch. The Italian dredge has a blade similar to our blade dredge, but it's slotted, it's not a solid blade. A lot of the sieving is done by the blade. They use jets to wash the sediment and fluidize the sediment in the same way that the blade dredge works. The slotted blade sieves most of the sand through, and as the catch is moved into the cage, further jets wash the catch as it sat in the cage, so the catch is continually washed and comes up a lot cleaner.
Recent developments in dredge technology allow harvesting of the animals from deeper depths. This is achieved by putting the pump on the front of the dredge rather than on the deck of the vessel. Harvesting the razor clam in general and dredging in particular are the subjects of much debate, with some authorities preferring to bide their time and learn from the experience of others. The apparent over-exploitation of stocks in Spain and Portugal has caused alarm bells to ring and strengthened the call for caution.
We have stocks of razorfish in Northern Ireland, but they have not been developed into an industrial fishery, as we have introduced a ban on the major resource here in Dundrum Bay. Our concerns were twofold. Firstly, that if fishery was to be opened, it would suffer a swift decline, which would not be in the long-term interest of either the stock or the fishermen. And secondly, we were concerned about the methodology, particularly hydraulic water jet dredges, which were in their infancy of development, and the collateral damage that the remainder of the environment would suffer. We're aware that hydraulic dredges are used below low water mark out to a depth of 7 to 10 metres to take razorfish, and we are concerned that where this has been used elsewhere, the fishery has suffered in a relatively short period of time. So we are prepared to examine on its merits a hydraulic dredge fishery, but it must comply with the measures of sustainability.
We see that there's a need for a balanced approach to all the different extraction methods. We see that certain areas will have to be put aside for the diving sector, and the deeper areas will be put aside for the vessel that will be dredging for the razor. We also see that people will be fishing at low water, and I think with a proper management regime, all sectors can work together, and all sectors will be represented on our management committee to make sure that they all work together for the benefit of the community, for the benefit of the stocks, and to make sure that we have a long-term sustainable fishery.
One of the main criticisms levelled against dredging is the disturbance it causes to the seabed, and whilst some research has been done on this subject in Scotland, there are still many answers left to find.
Work done by the laboratory in Aberdeen investigated changes in the physical appearance of the track, and they did record a disappearance of the physical appearance of the track over a 40-day period. Whether that is reflected in the biological community is yet to be fully determined. The mobile animals, crustaceans such as crabs and lobsters and small shrimp, they will return to the seabed within 40 days, but whether the large long-lived bivalves that are fished out, whether they will ever return within that period of time is yet to be determined, which is one of the aims of this work.
Well, razor clam populations are difficult to assess because they are extremely mobile. After the scallops, they are probably the most mobile of the bivalves that are found in British waters, so that it is possible to fish a razor clam bed fairly hard with a dredge and come back the next day to find that the numbers are just as abundant as they were the day before. Obviously, that process can only go on for a certain period of time, after which the surrounding population, which is feeding into the clam bed, will also have been exhausted.
Bordes Kiwara, BIM, the Irish Sea Fisheries Board, is responsible for sustainable development of the Irish fishing and aquaculture industries. The razor fishery on the East Coast is a relatively new fishery. It's been around for approximately 4 years. Initially, it was something of a Klondike. There was the introduction of the blade dredge technology. As a lot of people got into it, the quantities of catch increased. As a consequence, there was a reduction. The demand was not there to cope with that increased landings. And then, inevitably, as happens, the price dropped. In addition, there were also quality issues which were brought upon by inappropriate handling of the product. We see our role as development of new market outlets and ensuring that what is caught or what is landed obtains the maximum return. There's no point whatsoever in landing product which fails to reach an appropriate price or gain an appropriate price, as that is not in the most efficient use of the resource. The resource has to be used efficiently and sustainably.
On the razorfish side of things, there are good marketing opportunities in developing new markets. However, we must be sure that we'll be able to supply those markets, and that's why we're making sure that the regulating order approach that we are proposing is the right way forward to make sure that we get a balance between the catching opportunities and what the marketing opportunities are as well.
It seems that the razor clam does have the potential to develop into a profitable industry in our waters, if we can use our own research to build on the experience of others abroad. The lesson to be learned from fisheries on the continent is that stocks must be managed if long-term sustainability is to be achieved. But how should that be done?
Well, sustainable exploitation means that you exploit in a regular pattern and you take a certain harvest at intervals. The alternative to that is to fish the entire bed out at one go and thus destroy the stock completely, or at least for the foreseeable future, and you get at best an irregular pattern of exploitation after that.
There is a development opportunity here for razorfish, and rather than enable the industry to simply go and take them, we're looking at, with this project, at various methodologies of animal husbandry to ensure that the resource is managed in a sustainable fashion by the use of hatcheries to reproduce them, and ranging or ranching those shellfish out onto the environment where they can then be harvested for human consumption.
At the Centre for Marine Resources and Mariculture in Portaferry, Northern Ireland, Research has already begun. Experimental breeding has already taken place, and the team believe the razor clam shows real potential as a suitable species for aquaculture.
Here at Seamar we managed to condition and spawn razor shellfish last summer. This was predominantly the species Ensis siliqua, the pod razor. We collected them from the wild, brought them in and held them in trays of sand for a few weeks, during which time the gonads developed. We fed them with the algae that you see bubbling here behind me, which allows the gonads to develop to a point where the eggs are ripe. At that point we can take them out, give them a thermal shock which induces them to spawn. We can collect the eggs and the sperm separately, mix them together and fertilise the eggs to produce larvae. In terms of on-growing, there are a number of potential ways of going ahead. We could see cultivation on the low intertidal in the same way as manila clams are cultivated, with anti-predator netting to remove predation from birds and crabs. However, as these animals tend to live very low on the intertidal, that may not be the best way forward. We may see them cultivated in subtidal parks, again with or possibly without predator netting. If they were to be cultivated in a sort of a ranch scenario where they're being released back onto already fished beds, then it may just be a numbers game that you have to put down so many animals that a reasonable proportion would then make it through to the fishery.
The criteria for successful bivalve aquaculture revolve primarily around selecting a good site. It's very important to have good temperatures and also good food availability in the form of algae within the water column for the bivalves to feed. If these conditions are good, then the bivalves will grow at a good rate, and this will reduce production time and hence production cost.
No matter what species you are harvesting, the quality of the product when it reaches the consumer is of paramount importance to the long-term success and profitability of the industry. We are just beginning to learn about the biology of the razor clam, but already it is apparent that this is a species which demands careful handling and treatment if it is to arrive in the marketplace in first-class condition. One man who knows exactly what that condition should be is Chef Danny Miller, who regularly features razor clams on the menu in the Narrows restaurant in Portaferry.
When I receive delivery of razor shellfish, first and foremost I check that the actual items are bound as such, similar to asparagus. And then I check odour, that they smell fresh and of the sea, and that there's no other smell that aromas from them. And check then the actual shells individually, that there's no cracks or embellishments along the membrane. It shouldn't be cracked or in any way exposing the flesh. Also I check the siphon to make sure that it's fresh. You can tell by just pressing the tip, as you see it will recede into its shell, and that's the first sign that it's nice and lively. Also, the tail end shouldn't be protruding, and if it is, it should still be nice and firm.
Terry McCoy is owner and head chef at the Red Bank restaurant in Skerries near Dublin.
The first thing the fisherman must do is guarantee the quality. So if he's a fisherman that cares for the fish that he's catching, and especially razor fish, he will take them up and he'll band them and he'll end them all up in the same direction with the foot down and put the bands around them so that they don't open and the gasket don't open, because the minute the gasket breaks on those, or they open or are damaged in any way, that's their lifespan is greatly cut down. Now if he cooperates and does that and brings that to me, I can keep them for 4, 5, maybe even 8 days in the fridge at cool temperatures, which is absolutely superb for any fish, because you won't keep prawns that long, but razorfish you can, given the care and attention.
What you have to remember that when you're dealing with shellfish, when you're dealing with these bivalve mollusks, is that they are fairly delicate animals and they have to be treated and handled with care.
A lot of people laugh at me and I tell them that they actually get depressed and they get stressed, but they actually get stressed more as human beings do, just by shocking them and mishandling and just doing everything that's you'd think a normal shellfish could stand, but it doesn't stand it at all. You've really got to handle them with kid gloves.
These are a species that is not normally exposed to the air. It lives under the sand it is usually surrounded by water, and therefore the specific conditions for razorfish are that once they're harvested, they need to be kept moist, preferably re-immersed in a tank immediately so that they don't dry out. They should not be exposed to a strong sunlight or wind conditions, and they should be placed, they should be banded, handled carefully and banded and placed in a depuration tank as soon as possible.
Research is continuing to discover the best way to handle razor clams when they are caught in order to maximise both quality and shelf life. But already the main principles of best practice have been established. The catch should be sorted as soon as it lands on deck or on the beach. Dead or damaged animals should be discarded and the healthy clams separated into their different species. Next, they should be bundled together using elastic bands at both ends so they are firmly secured and can't escape or damage themselves.
Alright, I've taken selected the razors from the catch. I'm going to give them a quick rinse before I start banding them. Okay, I'm going to grade by sight the large from the smalls. Anything that's damaged that you haven't seen, or sometimes you get the odd empty one, you take that out, of course. The smaller curved ones, they're for the Spanish market. The large straight ones, they're going to Hong Kong, Singapore.
The reason that razor clams need to be banded is that, like all bivalve shellfish, the shells naturally spread apart under the tension of a springy ligament and only held shut by a muscle. As the animals are normally in a burrow, they are restricted and can't open in the burrow. Therefore, we need to band them to simulate the conditions they are normally living in. Otherwise, the muscles naturally trying to hold a spring shut get tired and they open. And this causes the membrane along the length of the animal to split, and thus they die extremely quickly.
Care should be taken to make sure that all the siphons or feet in a bundle face the same way round. The bundles should also be held horizontally to prevent feet becoming trapped in the bottom of the trays. The catch should be stored in a suitable container, such as a basket or box, to protect it from wind, rain and sun. Razors are quite sensitive animals which don't respond well to exposure to the elements. Ideally, they should be kept in running seawater, but if that isn't possible, they should be chilled by placing sacking or old carpet soaked in seawater over their containers. This helps to produce a microclimate which prevents them from drying out.
When razor clams are dredged, they are dredged from areas which are classified as A, i.e. fit for human consumption. However, care should be taken that when you are holding animals in the running water, that should you steam into an area that is classified as B, that requires treatment before human consumption, that water stream is turned off, as otherwise the animals will be contaminated and rendered unfit. Similarly, all harbours are almost always contaminated in some form or manner, be that from bacteriological contamination or be that from oil or other refuse. And therefore it is imperative that the animals have to be, the water stream has to be turned off in those circumstances.
European law states that live bivalve molluscs must not be re-immersed in water, which could cause additional contamination between harvesting and landing. Only take water from the harvesting area. Do not take water from a more contaminated or unclassified area. Do not take water from contaminated harbours. Ensure that there is no contamination from the vessel, such as from sewage or oil waste. Even in their containers, clams should be treated gently. Knocks or jarring through rough handling are not tolerated well, so they should always be moved with care. Once handled, the quality will be as good as it ever will be. Handling thereafter is what determines the end product quality.
The quality of the shellfish arriving at this premises is absolutely paramount. If something's happening to them on the way, there's no way you can get that back. That's lost time. So we need them here the day they're caught. We need them handled on the boat, kept out of the sun, covered in wet sacks if they haven't got a chill on the boat, kept in water a certain time to degrip them. Shock is a big problem. Throwing boxes around in the back of a van is one of the worst things that can happen.
The animals must be sorted, graded and banded as soon as possible. Banded bundles should be placed horizontally in the container to prevent damage to the foot. They should be chilled or held in running water and protected from excessive wind, rain or sun. Do not apply ice directly onto the animal or leave them in melting ice water. This kills the animals. The animals must be transferred to a depuration or packing centre within 6 hours of landing. All animals harvested from all categories of waters must be accompanied by official movement documents. Most newly identified razor clam beds are in Class B areas, and considerable work has been done by Seafish to find out how the depuration process needs to be defined to suit these animals. Razor clams are biologically quite different to most other groups of shellfish and may well react in a very different way. So far, trials carried out on diver-caught animals have been encouraging.
Bivalve mollusks in particular feed on their filter feeders. They take plankton and other materials, other food items out of the water columns. Specifically, they take out bacteria and they accumulate bacteria in their bodies, and in order to make sure that they're safe, that they're not carrying any pathogens, they need to be depurated, or very often need to be depurated before they are suitable for human consumption. Shellfish can only be, bivalve mollusks can only be taken from classified harvesting waters, and if shellfish come from B-class waters, then they have to be depurated or purified in order to ensure their safety for consumption.
Basically, we will put in a depuration system. We don't want to give our customers any risk of getting any form of disease, any form of viral infection. We want to increase the lifespan of the animal. We will improve our market. We will get a better return on what we send out. We're able to pay fishermen more as a result of that.
Razor shellfish that have been damaged during harvesting, for example, if the siphon is blocked, if the shell is chipped or cracked, or if the animal has been stressed really in any way, are highly unlikely to depurate effectively. As such, they must be prohibited from depuration.
There are 3 categories of razor clam beds that we fish from. There's a Class A, which is fit for human consumption, but we still intend to depurate anyway, just to fully purify that animal and make sure we don't take any chances. On the B-class beds, we need to depurate those animals in order to bring them to an A-class level. We're prepared to do that. We see a market for that, and we can raise money from that. That's not a problem. When you get to the Class C, it's not worth the effort. The amount of effort and time and work we would require to put into it, there's not a market for that. We're not prepared to do it.
Because this is a food safety issue, it is recommended that all bivalve mollusk purification centres operate hazard identification and control procedures. Seafish have published a practical guidance document to help businesses do this. Depuration of razor clams dredged from B category areas is currently not possible because of induced stress and high damage rates. Animals harvested from these areas using a dredge will not depurate consistently. There is a need to develop more gentle dredge techniques to harvest from Category B areas. Research has been completed on animals collected by hand. Clams that have been handled with care appear to fare quite well, but the quicker they are delivered for depuration, the better. Certainly, the process must be started within 6 hours of harvesting. Animals that have been shocked, damaged or have blocked siphons must not be accepted for depuration. The minimum water temperature for depuration is 10 degrees centigrade, and the water flow rate must be set to achieve in excess of 65% dissolved oxygen. Interest in razor clams across the fishing industry has been the inspiration for much scientific work in recent years, but we're still at the stage where, for every question a scientist answers, another 3 are raised. A long-term, sustainable industry must be our only goal, but we need to discover more of this little animal's secrets before we can be sure of that.
We fish Category A waters all the time. We don't fish in Category B, Category C. So every catch we put ashore is documented. We fill out. We have our logbook. It's filled out every time we land, and it goes along with the batch as to where they were caught, what species we caught, time, date. Everything is recorded.
Every batch of bivalve molluscs that is harvested either on a fishing vessel or on the foreshore, either through the wild fishery or from an aquaculture operation, must be accompanied by a movement document on arrival at a packing or purification centre.
One of the problems with any fishery is understanding the biology, and it's more than true for razor clams is we just don't know enough about the biology. I also think there's a need for fishermen and scientists to work together to optimise dredge design.
I have concerns that any method of harvesting doesn't get out of scale with the resource.
The animal should be banded and graded immediately on capture, not overly packed when banded, as otherwise the shells interdigitate. They interdigitate together and thus damage the animals.
We're interested in culturing razor shellfish because we feel there's a real potential to cultivate this species and to provide a new species for aquaculture.
Basically, if you receive poor quality fish from a fisherman, I will not take it, I can't sell it, I won't get paid for it.
They actually have a very short life, I understand. They only live for 7 years and have sex twice in their life, so they have sad little lives until they end up on our plate.